ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम शारदा शारदाम्भोजवदना वदनाम्बुजे सर्वदा सर्वदास्माकं सन्निधिं सन्निधिं क्रियात् सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् अज्ञानां जाह्नवीतीर्थं विद्यातीर्थं विवेकिनां सर्वेषां सुखदं तीर्थं भारतीतीर्थमाश्रये विद्यागणकसम्पन्नं वीतरागं विवेकिनं वन्दे वेदान्ततत्त्वज्ञं विदुशेखरभारतीम् ओम्. We are looking at the Mahavakya Tattvamasi that occurs in the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad, and this occurs 9 times in the 6th chapter. Now, in that context, the big question is that what is the meaning of the Mahavakya Tattvamasi, and what is the Tatparya of the section? Why is it being repeated so many times? Now, in Advaita, we say that the purpose and the Tatparya of this section is to convey Abheda or identity between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. It is to convey the Advaita Tattvam that Atma or Brahman is all that exists, and any sort of multiplicity that appears is only an illusion, it's mithya. And the underlying reality behind this universe of multiplicity is one and one alone, and it is that consciousness, and that consciousness is none other than the Swarupa or the intrinsic nature of the one who is seeking moksha. That is, what the sadhaka is seeking is himself. And in the knowledge of the identity is the emancipatory knowledge, the knowledge that leads to moksha. The Purva Pakshi, who is Advaitin, does not agree that the import of this section is to convey Abheda. According to him, the import of this section is actually Dvaita, or to convey duality or difference. Therefore, he does not agree that the reading of the mantra that occurs 9 times, he does not agree that the reading is Sa Atma Tattvamasi. He claims that the reading is Sa Atma Atattvamasi. Now, in this context, we had looked at various examples that were conveyed in the Upanishad itself. In each of the 9 occasions that the mantra Tattvamasi occurs, there is an example that also occurs. And the Purvapakshi had said, if you examine the example, it will become apparent that Advaita can never be the Tatparya of the section. It has to be Dvaita alone, because all the examples convey Dvaita. In fact, they are incompatible with Advaita. So far, we had looked at 6 different examples, and in the last talk, we had examined 2 particular examples, which was the 5th and the 6th times that the Mahavakya Tattvamasi occurs. In the 5th time, the Guru in this section, who is the father, Uddalaka Aruni, shows through the example of the banyan tree seed that Sat, which is the ultimate cause for this universe, may not be easily apparent, but it is from that Sat that this entire universe came. And to illustrate that, he asks his son to bring the seed of a banyan tree, and he asks him to break it. And when you break that seed, there is nothing within the seed itself. And he says, within this seemingly nothing, what you call nothing, is this entire banyan tree itself. You cannot see that banyan tree existing within this seeming nothing, but it actually does exist. Because if you plant that seed and you water it, over time it grows into the banyan tree. Therefore, it follows that the banyan tree is present in an unmanifest form within this Sat. Now, upon looking at that, the son asks, how is it possible for something which is invisible, how can that be the cause of this universe? How do you know that it even exists? To which the father gives the example which occurs in the sixth time the Mahavakya occurs. He asks his son to mix some salt within the water. And then he says, can you see the salt that has been dissolved? Of course, the son cannot. And he says, now taste it. And the son tastes the water. So he says, just like you are unable to see the salt, but you're able to taste it, it is possible that one set of pramanas are unable to reveal that object, but another set of pramanas do reveal the object. Similarly, just because you are not able to perceive Brahman or the Atma, it does not mean that the Brahman or Atma does not exist. It certainly does exist. And so what is the pramana for knowing it then? How do you know something exists? You only know something exists through a pramana. Without a pramana, how do you know? Pramana means a means of knowledge. Without some means of knowing it, how can you claim its existence? And the answer given in Shastra is that the means to know the existence of the ultimate cause, Brahman, is the Veda. It is the Veda that through which one knows the existence of the Atma, the existence of Brahman, and the knowledge of the identity of that Atma with Brahman. So, this much we had seen in the last talk. Now, we will consider a few more examples. In the 14th Khanda of the Chandogya Upanishad, 6th Adhyaya, the father Uddalaka Aruni tells his son the story of a traveler from the kingdom of Gandhara who has been waylaid by a bunch of thieves who have blindfolded him and taken him to a forest and have abandoned him. They have stolen all his possessions. And then that poor individual has been left in the forest. He has no way of knowing where he is because he has been blindfolded. Even if he somehow was to remove the blindfolds, he has been left in a forest, and therefore it is difficult for him to come out of the forest back into civilization. And it's very difficult for him to find somebody who can rescue him in such a situation. But even if he does somehow manage to overcome that, he's been left in a foreign country. It is not his hometown. He's from the kingdom of Gandhara, modern day Kandahar. So a person from Gandhara Nagaram has been abandoned like this in the middle of a forest. Using this example, what the teacher wants to convey is to use this as an illustration to show the problems that a sadhaka who is on a spiritual path is facing. He is lost in samsara, he is being troubled by various forces which are outside his control, and he is incapable of rescuing himself because he simply does not know the way out of the situation. That is the situation. It is similar to that person who has been abandoned, blindfolded in the middle of a forest in an unknown country by a bunch of thieves. That is the plight of a sadhaka who is trying to find a way out of samsara. And Uddalaka Aruni then says, such a person is helped by a useful, well meaning well wisher who is walking in the forest, who discovers this individual, who removes the blindfold, comforts him, gives him food, water, etc. And once he is in a position, uh, having regained his strength to go back to his place, he shows him the way out of the forest. He takes him to the edge of the forest. Then he tells him the way to go from that country to back to his home place in Gandhara Nagaram. So, what is the role of such an individual? That guide has essentially pointed. He has helped the individual to recover his senses. He has literally removed the blindfold from his eyes, has taken him to a place of safety, and then he has pointed out the exact route with which he can find his way home. That is similar to the role of a guru. And to convey the importance of a guru, a live guru, a person who himself is aware of the path out of samsara, who has himself traversed that path and therefore is aware of the pitfalls that lie in the path, who is compassionate to the sadhaka who is suffering from the trials and tribulations of samsara, and having known the path, guides that individual to walk the correct path, to show him the right path to moksha. And that is why, in saying all this, Uddalaka Aruni also says, Acharyavan Purusho Veda. The individual who is blessed with a guru is the one who knows Brahman, and by knowing Brahman is able to free himself. Atma Vidya or Brahma Vidya is not something that one can gain without the guidance and blessing of a guru who can show them the path because they themselves have walked that path. And it is out of a sense of compassion for the suffering jiva that the guru comes down from the level of paramartha or the highest reality that he is occupying. They step down into the realm of vyavahara or activity and teach the individuals the path to moksha through knowledge or jnana. So, this is the purpose of this example. The Purva Pakshi, the Dvaitin, the Nyayamritakara, looks at this example and he says there is a difference that is being conveyed in this example also. The sadhaka who is being compared to the waylaid traveler and moksha, which is the place to which he goes, the Gandhara Nagaram, they are two different things. The Purusha, the individual, and the destination, the city of Gandhara, are two different things. And therefore, it follows that this section cannot be talking about the identity of the individual and the thing that is attained or Brahman. Because the examples have a difference within them, the exemplified cannot be conveying identity. The Siddhikara, in response, says we have to consider the context of this teaching here. Now, in the previous section, the 13th Khanda, Uddalaka Aruni had conveyed through the example of salt dissolved in water how it is possible for something's existence to not be known through one pramana, but for the same existence to be known through some other pramana. Just like the salt that has been dissolved in the water is not perceptible to the eye, but it is perceptible to taste. The tongue can taste it, but the eye cannot see it. Similarly, it is possible for one to know Brahman through some other pramana, even though it is not available for access by perception. The natural question at that point then becomes is what is the pramana by which Brahman can be known? Okay, Brahman is not known by perception, but how can one know it? And to answer that question, Madhusudana Saraswati Swamigal is saying that it is knowable through the Shastra as taught by a Guru. And the words Acharyavan Purusho Veda indicate what is the Tatparyam or import of this Khanda. The Khanda has come anticipating a question that someone may have after reading the previous section. The Upanishad, through this example, wants to convey that it is possible to know Brahman through a Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam of the scriptures done under the auspices or the blessing of a Guru. When the Guru teaches the scriptures to the student comes to know that Brahman through the Guru, who himself is a Shrotriya Brahmanishtha, as stated in the Mundaka Upanishad, when he himself has learnt it from his Guru, and his Guru has learnt it from his Guru, and so on and so forth. This beginningless tradition of Guru Sishya, of the Guru and his disciple, who have learned these scriptures in a beginningless tradition, beginningless sequence, and having known it, convey it to the next generation. It is only through that transmission mechanism of the scriptures as expounded by a guru coming from a tradition of interpretation and understanding the scriptures. It is only through that mechanism that someone can know Brahman, and not merely by an independent study of the scriptures or independently meditating upon it. Therefore, even though there may be a difference between the individual and the city of Gandhara, the traveler and the Gandhara city, that is not the message that is conveyed through the section. The message that is conveyed through the section is how can one know Brahman? And that is the purpose of the example, and we must not extend the example beyond its scope. Nor can we expect that the example and the exemplified match each other in every respect. That is an unreasonable expectation. There is no such requirement for such a thing to be the case. Therefore, the purpose of an illustration must be understood correctly and it must be applied correctly. And to do that, to know how to understand an illustration that is conveyed by the Upanishads, you need to have studied it under a tradition, you needed to have studied it under a Guru Shishya Parampara, and once you do that, there will be no doubt what the import of the section is. With that, the seventh example has also been explained of the traveler from the city of Gandhara. Next, we will go into the eighth example, which occurs in the 15th Khanda of the Chandogya Upanishad 6th chapter. In this Khanda, the Upanishad is showing us a scene of a person who is in the death throes, who is on his deathbed. All his relatives have gathered around him and they are all asking him, do you know me? Can you see me? Do you recognize who I am? And that person, sometimes he says yes, sometimes he is not able to recognize them. As the mantra says, Purusham Somya Uta Upatapinam Gyataya Paryupasate Janasi mam iti Tasya Yavanna Vang Manasi Sampadyate Manaha Prane Pranaha Tejasi Tejaha Parasyam Devatayam Tavajjanati Atha Yadasya Vang Manasi Sampadyate Manah Prane Pranas Tejasi Tejah Parasyam Devatayam Atha Najanati. So here Uddalaka Aruni says, Hey Soumya, O dear one, just like a person who is in his deathbed and his relatives gather around him asking him, Janasi mam, do you know me? Do you recognize me? And he said, and the father says, just like how that person is able to recognize those people and is able to respond, so long as his senses are with him. So long as the speech hasn't resolved, into his mind, and so long as his mind hasn't resolved into the prana, and so long as the prana has not resolved into the fire element, and that fire element has not resolved into the Ishvara, so long as that is the case, that individual is able to recognize, know the people, and respond. If the if his speech has resolved into his mind, he may recognize the individual, but he may not be able to speak. Now, when his mind has resolved into prana, he may still be alive, but he is not able to recognize or respond. And but the body is still alive. Now, when the mind has resolved into the prana has resolved into the tejas tattvam has resolved into Ishvara, then there is no possibility for recognition. The Nyayamritakara interprets this example as follows. He says, so long as the jiva is blessed by Ishvara, so long as the over rulership of the jiva with the Ishvara is in place and Ishvara is blessing that jiva, the jiva's life exists, he is able to function. But the moment Ishvara's blessing has been withdrawn, the jiva has no ability to carry on his life. His very existence in earth has been brought to a close upon the withdrawal of Ishvara's blessings. And therefore, the purpose of this section is to convey the difference between the Jiva and the Ishvara. How then can it be argued by the Advaitin that this section is talking about the Abhedam or the identity of the Jiva and the Ishvara that is totally untenable with this example? This is what the Nyayamritakara is saying. The Siddhikara is saying, no, that is not the intent of this section. What it is describing is the process of the Videha Mukti of the Jnani. That is, a Jnani who has known Brahman in his life has verily become Brahman himself. And what is being talked about here is the process by which the body and the sense organs of the Jnani resolve into their causal elements. Therefore, the purpose of this section is to talk about the Videha Mukti or the ultimate release of the Jnani at the death of the physical body. To this, the Nyayamritakara asks, if the purpose of this section was to talk about the Videha Mukti of the Jnani, why is it conveying more than that? So, for example, the Upanishad says that when his speech merges with the mind with the prana with the tejas with the highest Brahman, he is not able to recognize anything, he is not able to function in this world, he has attained Videha Mukti. If that was the intent of what the Shruti was, why then in the second mantra of that section does it talk about so long as that has not happened, he is able to interact. If the intention was to convey Videha Mukti, there is no need to talk about how he is able to function when that resolution of the speech into the mind into prana, prana into tejas, and tejas into Ishvara, the status of that individual when that resolution has not happened need not have been conveyed. What is the purpose of that? So, therefore, you cannot say that this section is talking about the Videha Mukti of the Jnani. It is talking about the subservience of the Jiva to the Ishvara. To this, the Siddhikara says, no, that is not the case because an important point is being revealed through this Anvaya Vyatireka. There is no, the Nyayamritakara had said that it was Vyartha. If the purpose of the section was to convey Videha Mukti, then the talk of what happens when the resolution does not occur and how the jiva is able to still function becomes vyartha or useless. The Siddhikara says no, it is not a case that the second mantra becomes useless in this explanation. There is a very important purpose of that. What the Upanishad wishes to convey is that the process of the Videha Mukti and the process of the death of the Ajnani are exactly the same. That is, the Ajnani also, so long as his mind has not resolved, the speech has not resolved to mind, the mind has not resolved to prana, prana has not resolved to tejas, tejas has not resolved to Ishvara, that krama or the sequence is still the same. Whether it is a jnani or an ajnani, the only difference between those two individuals at the time of death is whether they have jnana or ajnana. Now, if they have jnana, there is no coming back of that individual. He has that Videha Mukti is the final uh, presence of that jnani in this world. There is no return for that individual, but for an ajnani, there is a return. He will come back. So, what the Upanishad is wishing to convey is that the process of death is the same. The physical process of death is the same, whether it's a jnani or an ajnani. It is not that the jnani will suddenly merge into Ishvara, into a glow of light, and the ajnani, whatever, dies in a different way. The process of death is the same for the physical body, whether it's a jnani's physical body or the ajnani's physical body, but the underlying effect of that death, in one case, it is the ultimate end. In another case, it is merely an incidental end. One of the deaths that Ajnani will face, he will keep coming back. Mrityosa mrityum apnoti ya iha nana iva pashyati. So long as he sees multiplicity in this world, he will move from death to death. But the moment he has the jnana or the knowledge of identity, that he is Brahman and there is absolutely no difference between him and Brahman, to such an individual, to such a jnani who abides in that through his life, for him there is no return. The physical process of death of the two will be the same, but the ultimate end is different. That is what is being conveyed by this section. Therefore, we cannot say that this section is talking about the Ishvara Adhinatva or the subservience of the Jiva to Ishvara. In the section, it is to talk about the process of Videha Mukti being exactly similar to the process of Deha Mukti or normal giving up of the body of an individual. With that, we have completed the eighth example also. Now, there is one more example left, which we will look, and then we will conclude this series. The 16th khanda of the 6th adhyaya is the ninth and final time of the Tattvamasi Mahavakya occurring in the Chandogya Upanishad. And here, the example given by Uddalaka Aruni to his son is a situation in a king's court. Now, the soldiers have caught hold of a thief and they have brought him in front of the king. The king asks the soldiers, "What did he do?" And the soldiers say, "He has taken some money." Apaharshit, they say. He has taken some money. And to clarify, they say, Steyamakarshit. He has stolen that money. Not that he has simply taken the money from someone like a loan or someone has given him money as charity. He has stolen somebody else's money. That is why we have brought him in front of you. The king says, "Bring a red hot axe." So they heat the axe and they bring it in front of the thief. And the king says, "Now you must hold this axe." Now, if you hold the axe and it does not burn you, then you are speaking the truth. But if it burns you, you have lied. So let us not get into the appropriateness or the inappropriateness of such a test to determine truth and falsehood. The belief was that the truth will protect you from calamity, and falsehood will get you into trouble. The king explains his unique method of determining truth and falsehood. He says, if a person is resorting to falsehood, then there is nothing to protect him. And therefore, when he touches the hot axe, he will be burnt. But when a person is resorting to the truth in all his actions, then the truth will act as an insulation, it will protect him, and the truth will save him from the burning axe. And therefore, the intention of using this example by the father Uddalaka Aruni with his son is to differentiate why the Jnani will not come back after his death, but the Ajnani will come back. If the process of the death is the same in the previous section, why is it the case that the Jnani does not come back, but the Ajnani alone comes back? What is the differentiating factor? And to convey that, what is being taught in this example is that the one who is resorting to truth, who resorts to what is the reality, to Sat, that abidance and that knowledge of Sat will protect that individual, and therefore he will not be reverting back into samsara. Whereas an individual who is dependent on ephemeral things of this world to Anrita, and here the comparison of falsehood is being made with unreality, and the comparison of truth is being made with an abidance in Sat, an abidance in the knowledge of the reality. And therefore, what the Upanishad wishes to convey through this, and what Uddalaka Aruni as the Guru wants to convey through this, is that even though the process of death of the physical body of the Jnani and the Ajnani is the same, the Ajnani comes back because he is not resorting to the absolute reality. He is still caught up in the world of the ephemeral. He is still caught up in the Anritam. Whereas the Jnani who is abiding in Sat, who is abiding in reality, he is protected by that Sat Vidya, and that knowledge is protecting him, and it prevents him from coming back, taking another birth, and going back into the cycle of samsara. That is a differentiating factor. The Nyayamritakara again interprets this example completely differently, and he says that this example is actually talking about bheda or difference because one always desires to steal something or take something that does not belong to oneself. Therefore, the difference between the thief and the thing stolen is very much self evident. That being the case, how can you say that this example is talking of identity? Because the exemplified is talking of difference. To which the Siddhikara says, no, that is not the intent of the example. The intent of the example is to say, as we have already spoken earlier, is to prove why is it the case that the Jnani does not come back but the Ajnani comes back, which was a possible doubt that would have occurred from the previous section's example. The purpose of this example follows on from that teaching, and it is to establish that an abidance in reality is the reason why the Jnani doesn't come back, whereas the abidance in the ephemeral, the unreal, is the reason why the Ajnani comes back, and that is being conveyed through this example by saying that an abidance in truth protects the speaker of the truth, whereas an abidance in falsehood does not protect. And therefore, if the individual had really stolen the wealth, the money that you are accusing him of, if he touches this hot axe, he will, if he has really not taken it, he will be protected. If he has taken that money, he will get burned. And that is the uh, purpose of this example. The purpose of this example is not to talk about the difference between Brahman and the individual and the seeker of Brahman. In fact, it is to talk about the differentiating factor between what constitutes a jnani and what constitutes an ajnani, and why is there a difference in what follows after death, even though the process of death itself is exactly the same between the two. With that, we have looked at all the 9 examples so far. And to recap, the first example occurring in the 8th khanda or the 8th subchapter is of the Shakuni Sutra Drishtanta of the hawk and the string. The purpose of it was to convey how the jiva, after facing the trials and tribulations of samsara in the waking and dream states, goes back and resolved into his own higher nature as Sat in the deep sleep state. In the next subsection, in the 9th khanda, is the example of the honey from different flowers being merged into one honey in the honeycomb and no differentiation being possible within it. And the purpose of that example was to say how the jivas may be many, apparently many, in the waking and dream states, but once they resolve back into their higher nature as Sat, there is only one consciousness that pervades all of them. The deep sleep of me is not different from the deep sleep of you. Ultimately, we all resolve back into that one and the same consciousness alone. Just like the honey from different flowers may be different when they are in the flower, but once they are in the honeycomb, they are absolutely the same. Similarly, the as the higher nature, there is no differentiation possible at all. It is only as the in association with the upadhis, the adjuncts, the physical body and the mind, that any such differentiation is possible between the jivas. That was the purpose of the 9th khanda, or the second time the Mahavakya occurs. The same idea was conveyed in the next khanda, the 10th khanda, where the waters from different rivers all merge into the ocean as one. And as the ocean water, there is no differentiation possible between the rivers. Similarly, the jivas may be different because of upadhis, but as Sat, they are the same. So, the same idea was conveyed in the next section also. In the 10th section, the third time this Mahavakya is occurring. The fourth time the Mahavakya occurs is in the 11th section, which talks about how the jiva pervades the entirety of the physical body, and the teacher gives the example of the life principle pervading the entire tree. When that life principle withdraws from any one element, that like a branch of the tree, for example, then that branch dries up. And when the life principle again enters it, that branch again has life, it starts flowering and starts having leaves again. Similarly, the idea was conveyed that consciousness pervades the entire physical body. It is not something which is localized in any one particular place. The fifth time the Mahavakya occurs is in the 12th subsection, wherein the teacher gives the example of the banyan seed to establish how this entire universe was in an unmanifest form in Sat, and even when the Sat is not visible, it does exist. The sixth time the example occurs, the sixth time the Mahavakya occurs, I beg your pardon, is in the 13th chapter, wherein the example is given of the salt in the water which is dissolved, and through that example, it is proven how it is possible for the knowledge of Sat to be possible through one pramana, even though it is not known through some other pramana. In response to the question, how then should Brahman be known, was the example given of the person, a traveler from the city of Gandhara who has been waylaid by robbers, and how he is rescued by a well-wisher who shows him the path out of the forest and back to his own place. Through that, the idea that was conveyed was that the knowledge of Sat or Brahman can be had through the intervention of a guru who himself knows the scriptures. So the Shruti Pramana is the means for it. And when the Shruti Pramana has been conveyed through a live teacher, it is then that the knowledge of Brahman can be had. That is the means to know it. The question was, what is the benefit of such a knowledge? And the answer was given in the next section, which talks about the Videha Mukti of the Jnani. And through that, the example, what was conveyed was that the Jnani has the same process at the end of his life as the Ajnani. They both die in the same way. But the result is because the differentiation between the two is because the Jnani has the knowledge of Brahman and the Ajnani does not have the knowledge of Brahman. The Jnani does not return back into samsara, whereas the Ajnani does. In response to the question, why is there such a difference, is the final example that is conveyed, which is in the 16th section, which is the ninth time the Mahavakya occurs. And in the 16th section, the example is of a thief who has been brought in front of the king, and the king gives him a unique punishment of bringing a red hot axe in front of him. And he says if he's speaking the truth will insulate him, whereas if he's speaking falsehood, he will get burnt. Similarly, the intention of the teacher is to convey that if one abides in the reality of Brahman and shuns Anatma, which is Mithya, which is unreal, such an individual is a Jnani, and that is why he does not come back, because that knowledge protects him. Whereas an Ajnani who does not have that protection, who is still attached to Anatma, will constantly keep coming back to samsara. He will get burnt, just like the thief who resorts to falsehood gets burnt. With that, we have elaborately looked at the Mahavakya, which occurs 9 times across the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad, and have established why there is a compatibility of that Mahavakya with the Advaita teaching alone, and that the examples in a superficial manner may seem to convey Dvaita, but that is missing the point. The purpose of the teaching, the logical flow of thought that occurs in the Advaita teaching is missing in the Dvaita teaching, and that is why the reading of this section, reading of the mantra, should be Sa Atma Tattvamasi and not Sa Atma Atattvamasi. ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः